Welcome back to our journey through Luke 1 verse 80, where John goes into the wilderness before he begins his public ministry to Israel. And as we've been looking, I've been suggesting that wilderness experiences are part of God's divine discipleship plan, and that they're linked to this idea of being on probation, of actually showing we have what it takes to do the job that we're called to. And wilderness experiences being a place of investment, these 40s talking, the number 40 talking about all these, this probation, this being on trial, being tested. It's a place for teaching, for training, where God is preparing us for what lies ahead. And I want us to maybe see that John's had this period where he's grown up to be strong in spirit. He's been invested into before he goes into the wilderness. And one of the observations I have about a lot of these wilderness experiences and the characters that we looked at earlier this week, for most of them, they've gone through a period of training and development and experience before they go into their wilderness. So it's almost like there's a taste, there's an initial taper being lit, the firework fuse is lit, but before it can go off, that fuse has got to burn for a while. And it's a little bit like people have had a taste of God, they've been taught, they've learned, and now they're going through a wilderness experience to refine and hone that before they go into their destiny. And for you and me, I believe God gives us deposits. He gives us things that he's invested into us. We have the Bible. And God gives us the Bible so that we can know him and know his heart, know his character, know his mission. And how many Christians don't read their Bible? God gives us the Bible and we want to serve him. But actually, are we willing to invest and let the richness of God's Bible speak into our lives? He gives us the church family, and so often people think they can follow God without being connected and without being in relationship. How can you have a ministry to other people if you're not going to spend time with people, if you're not going to spend yourself on behalf of people? If you don't want to actually be in relationship with people, how can you serve people? God gives us the church family as part of that investment into what it means to be part of his kingdom. But he also gives us the Holy Spirit, that we can be empowered, that we can go beyond the natural into something of the supernatural of God. And God gives us these areas of investment and deposits them in us. And I believe he often does that and then leads us into the wilderness in order that following the investment, that investment can be developed. It's almost as if God's saying, I want you to learn how to put into practice the deposit I've placed within you. And in the wilderness, the thing about wildernesses are, they're not all rocks, dust and sandstone. Sometimes the wildernesses that we read about are actually pasture lands. It's a bit like saying, okay, we go up into the lakes, into the Lake District, and we go up onto the Lake District hills, and we're in a wilderness. You can go up onto the moors, you can go up onto the fells, and they're covered in grass, and they're maybe boggy, they're a different terrain, but again they're a form of wilderness. And the thing about being in a wilderness is it's a place of silence. And it's in the silence that we get to think. It's in the silence that we get to listen. It's in the silence that we get to have those conversations with God. They're a place of isolation. You go into a wilderness and often you can go walking. It's quite easy to go walking in the lakes for hours and hours, if not days on end, and not meet another soul. They're a place of isolation, and in that place of silence and isolation, everything gets stripped away, where we get put in a place where it's time to stop and listen, time to engage all the senses, our five senses, and take in our environment. Some people might talk about being mindful, but it's actually a chance to stop and reflect. It's a chance to stop and meditate. It's a chance to stop and listen. And so the wildernesses are actually a place of retreat where we can go to have that time of trial and testing, but also where we can go to meet with God. But in that place, it's also a place where it's easy to become hungry. You go walking for any length of time, I love going up mountains, but boy, do you get hungry. And actually, when you're there, there's that place of, have you gone prepared with some food? If you're in a wilderness, you need to learn, if you're going to be there for any length of time, think of your wild camping, get into your inner Bear Grylls getting out. How are you going to feed yourself in a wilderness? How are you going to live off the land? There's a sense of learning a different set of skills. And they're an opportunity to ask ourselves the question that when we're hungry, where do we turn? When we're thirsty, how will we be refreshed? And these symbols of hunger and thirsting are linked in with the wilderness experience of chasing after God and going, God, I want to know you. I want to encounter you. I want to grow in that relationship with you. You know, we might have a modern day view of some of the early church fathers where they would become hermits in the desert. And we might have a view on that. But actually they were retreating in order to be with God, to listen. And in there's a richness of their experience of God that can teach us many things. But in that place where God's placed a deposit and investment in us and leads us into the wilderness to learn all about that, it's a little bit of that question of, can we learn to trust and depend on God in that wilderness? Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego were three friends of Daniel's who stood up for what they believed and got thrown into the fiery furnace. They were given an opportunity to avoid that, but they said, we believe God can rescue us, but even if he doesn't, we'll be faithful. And there's something of learning through the wilderness experience to enjoy the giver and not the gift, that whatever lies ahead, whatever our destiny involves, have we discovered a dependence on God over the circumstances, that no matter what circumstances we find ourselves in, that the wilderness has driven us deeper into God, that we can stand the test of whatever gets thrown at us. The wilderness tests our willingness to trust God. It builds and strengthens our faith. It teaches us how to walk with God and to trust him. And I want to suggest that we shouldn't be fearing a wilderness, but instead we should be embracing it and exploring how it takes us deeper in our relationship with God. What's your wilderness experience? Is it something that's causing you to run to God or from God?